Relax. I'm not here to ruin stat chasing. Don't worry, Pat. People, even just that split second they saw me, they're like, "Oh no, this is ruined."
I know. This is supposed to be the little peaceful getaway here.
Yeah, no, I'm just here at the very top. Stat chasing is coming here in just a second, but we wanted to let you guys know about a free roll mid-season draft we are going to do with you guys, ship chasing viewers and listeners. So you guys know we've been doing the Fantasy Football World Series, and we're having our invitational draft again on Saturday. But they told us, hey, if you guys want some of your listeners to come in here and do a league with us, we'll put that on for you guys. They've ponied up $150. This is going to be, I'll pull up the settings here, a super flex best ball format. And it is tight end premium, Pat. It is super flex. We're going to go 18 rounds. And we're going to tell you guys how you can enter to join us for this. But are there any other settings things here I'm forgetting?
Well, not any settings things, but we have kind of an interesting setup here where you're not just going to be drafting to win this thing, but there's sort of a team element to this as well.
That's right. So we weren't thinking, in previous listener leagues, Pat and I co-managed and you went against us. But now we're thinking we're going to have a Pete division and we're going to have a Pat division. So Pat and I are both going to draft. That leaves 10 spots in our 12-team league. And I think what we do is this. Make sure you're subscribed to the Ship Chasing YouTube channel. Leave a comment below in this stat chasing video. If you're listening to this on iTunes, you need to head over to YouTube, leave a comment and subscribe. And tell us what your favorite stat is from this edition, this week 8 edition of Stat Chasing. And then also, as a throwback to our previous giveaway, use hashtag SC banners so we can go through and look through the comments and know who actually wants to be in this listener league.
Yep, so easy enough. And hey, I mean, we've been trying to get you over on the YouTube and subscribed. And so please go over and head over to the YouTube and subscribe anyway. Because if you're listening on the podcast, we're also going to be putting this up on the podcast feed at the same time as the YouTube channel once we get up to 1,000 subscribers. So an additional incentive for all of you podcast listeners.
Yep. So to summarize here, what you have to do, you are watching Stat Chasing. You need to leave a comment down below with your favorite stat, hashtag SC banners. We're going to have a quick turnaround on this. Tomorrow night when we do our typical Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern show, we will do the randomizer. I will dust off the randomizer. We will get all the entrants into there and we'll spin that wheel. 5 people to join the Pat division, 5 people to join the Pete. And then you must be available Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern to draft. So you're more than welcome to leave comments and all that good stuff. But if you want to be in the league, make sure you are available for Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We will do a live stream of it. It'll be a grand old time. Pat, I say we do it like we did the previous one. We can bring some of the listeners on to join us as well for the stream.
Yes, I think that's exactly how we'll do it.
All right.
A lot of fun.
Then you guys know the rules. That is the deal. I'm about to get out of here and let Pat do his thing. We will see you guys all on Wednesday night. Enjoy Stat Chasing.
All right. Welcome to Stat Chasing. Let's get into it here. So I'm working on a new computer right here. So let me just see how this goes. All right. I think we're all set. So if you have not listened to the show before, I'll do a quick rundown. Have a little interesting addition to the rundown this week as well. But basically, this is the show where I go through all the stats that I think are really crucial to understanding what happened in this past week. Helps me get a foundation to be able to absorb all the great content that comes out later in the week for whatever type of fantasy that you're doing, season long, dynasty, DFS, whatever. I think this is just kind of a great foundation to help digest the past week. The stats that I'll be looking at come from PFF with yards per route run and targets per route run, which I think is a very useful stat, especially for tight ends. I also look at the dropbacks and routes run from PFF. And then I get some stats from RotoViz as well, looking at air yards and target share. I get Josh Hermsmeyer's Whopper metric from RotoViz's data as well. They also have average depth of target, which helps show where wide receivers are being used. And you can get a lot from like the type of role a pass catcher's in. And then the other thing I like that RotoViz has is expected points. And that is a stat where they weight opportunities, targets, and carries by the line of scrimmage. So that's especially useful for running backs. We're trying to figure out that workload. And then this week we have a new stat. So Ben Gretsch created this new stat last week that I think is really cool. It's called weighted targets per route run. So it's targets per route run, but it includes air yards. So what's cool about this stat is that with one number, you can get a better understanding of a receiver's role, because targets per route run is great, shows the targets they're getting per route run, but weighted targets per route run shows that depth factor, that air yards is factored in. So Ben calculated it pretty similarly to the way Whopper's calculated, and so it's scaled from 0 to 1, just like Whopper. Why not just use Whopper, right? Because Whopper's just market share targets, market share of air yards, and scaled in the same way that weighted target per route run scaled, where it's tilted almost 2 to 1 towards targets. So what's the difference between Whopper and weighted targets per route run? There's two differences. One, Whopper is based on market share, so it's going to be scaled to the size of the offense. So a player who is like an alpha wide receiver in a low volume offense is going to look awesome in Whopper, but wouldn't look so good in weighted targets per route run. Whereas a guy who's in a really explosive offense, but is not necessarily the alpha in that offense, won't pop so much in Whopper, but might have a really nice weighted target per route run. And that can help identify different things. I mean, if there's a guy who's like clear alpha, and then he's entering a situation like Terry McLaurin against Dallas a couple weeks ago, where it looks like they're finally going to get right, then that's a guy that you really want to target, and Whopper's identifying something real. But in a lot of weeks, a guy with a big Whopper like that might not be entering a great matchup, and the low volume nature of the offense is something that Whopper's not really properly accounting for, at least for that specific week as we enter that week, right? It's kind of a way that Whopper kind of can distort things a little bit. Weighted targets per route run can help show us kind of the other dimension of that. So it's just kind of a different lens, a different way to help get like kind of the right angle on this stuff and make sure that we're being as predictive as possible. So that's really exciting. The other thing about it that's cool is that it's per route, not per game. So the per route element is a reason that I've really liked target per route run, because it can be very helpful, especially with like rookies, injuries, kind of emerging situations. That per route level can be really interesting. Sometimes like it can actually hurt a guy who's running a ton of routes. It's not bad to run a ton of routes. Scaling something on a per route basis might hurt a guy who's out there on 100% of dropbacks. So again, this isn't a replacement for Whopper. Looking at things per game is sometimes more important, often more important than per route. But this stat kind of gives us a new element. So I'm really excited about it. I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you go and subscribe to Ceiling Signals and read Ben's recap of weighted target per route run. He explains the stat in some more detail over there. He gets into like what we've seen thus far through all of these wide receiver situations, team by team. I'm not going to spoil any of that. Go read that. That's awesome. I will talk about it as it comes up and as I think it's important for this week's stats. Another thing that I've gotten from Ben Gretsch here is the term green zone for the area of the field inside the 10-yard line, and touches inside the 10 is high-value touches or high-value carries. Those are within the 10-yard line, and that's where we see a big boost in scoring. And then the snap data that I'm referencing comes from Pro Football Reference. Couple shout outs here, and then we can get to it. I have a chart right up here. This is been created by Sam Hoppin. This chart shows targets per route on the x-axis. It shows routes per team dropback on the y-axis, and then the bubble is air yards. So it's kind of giving us the whole weighted target per route run idea in one chart, where we've got the size of the bubble being the air yard percentage. So we want guys with the bigger bubbles here. We want them high up so they're running a bunch of routes, and we want them pretty far over here because they're getting targeted at a high rate. That's Julio Jones showing up right where we want to see guys. Russell Gage showing up where we don't want to see guys, not even running full slate of routes, not getting targeted highly, not seeing many air yards. Calvin Ridley, not a guy who we expect to be popping as an emerging player, but this week, because of the injury, kind of looks like a guy, like an emerging rookie or something, because he didn't run a full slate of routes, but he was targeted at a really high rate. He had a decent air yard share. So that's kind of the kind of the three areas that are pretty interesting on these charts. Guys who are up here at the top are clear alphas. Guys who are over here might be guys we want to fade. And guys who are down here over to the right are going to be guys who might be emerging or might be guys who, like Calvin Ridley, are alphas but got hurt at some point during the game. So I'm not going to talk through these charts every time. They're more just for the YouTube video for reference. I'll be talking through the stats as we go. So in Atlanta, let's get into it. And I'll start with Todd Gurley. He had 51% of snaps in this game, 11.6 expected points. He was not very efficient on the day, left 1 point on the field. He was not targeted in this game, went 11 for 46 on the ground and appeared to be benched briefly. He also ran out of bounds while the Falcons were trying to run out the clock. This is obviously a week after he scored his accidental touchdown. So still staying clearly on the throne here as the king of dust. Brian Hill got some of that run when it looked like Gurley may be getting benched. It was unclear, but Hill wasn't that great. He left 0.2 points on the field. So slightly inefficient on an 8.6 expected points workload, played 36% of snaps. Kind of looking like a little bit of a split here now. We'll have to see. Maybe this was just kind of them getting frustrated with Gurley, but he'll be back to what we were seeing last week where he was up around 70% of snaps. I don't know. He's making these huge mental errors, so it's possible they're going to start scaling him back, and this is a sign of things to come. Kadri Allison played 11% of snaps this week. Ito Smith was a healthy scratch. So something to watch there. The running back 3 here may now be Allison. Julio Jones, as I mentioned, clear alpha wide receiver, 33% target share, 59% air yard share, hit a whopper of 0.91, which is elite. He ran a route on 94% of dropbacks. He had a weighted target per route run of 0.86, which is great. And he had a yards per route run of 4.03, which is just unbelievable, which means on top of all the volume, he was also really efficient on a per target basis. So he continues to be awesome. He's generating a ton of volume, which is not just something that shows the way the offense is operating. Getting that volume is a skill in and of itself to some degree, and then really efficient on those targets. So Julio had an awesome game this week. Calvin Ridley suffered a foot sprain in this game. He may be back after their week 10 bye. Looks like he'll miss week 9. He only ran a route as a result on 42% of dropbacks. His weighted target per route run was 0.74, though, which is really strong. So operating as normal before he went down. Russell Gage in this game ran a route on 75% of dropbacks. Just a 10% target share, though. 8 out of just 0.3. So not being used downfield whatsoever. A whopper of just 0.15. So not a strong game at all from Russell Gage. Christian Blake here looks to be the guy behind Calvin Ridley. He ran a route on 53% of dropbacks, maybe ahead of Olamide Zaccheaus now, who only ran a route on 6% of dropbacks. So he was active in this game. They could have gone to Zaccheaus. They didn't. They went to Blake. Blake had a weighted target per route run of 0.23, which is not very good, but it was at least better than Gage. So he might be the better wide receiver dart throw over Gage. We'll have to see. Although Gage's role, I think, is more locked in. So Gage, I would say, does have the higher floor if Ridley misses. At tight end, Hayden Hurst ran a route on 83% of dropbacks, a 23% target per route run, a 0.5 weighted target per route run, and a 0.46 whopper. All of those are good marks. He was looking good in terms of all of those stats there. I have not been that high on Hurst at all this season. He's been 4th in the pecking order for much of the year, but he's now been at 19% target per route run or above in 3 of the last 4 weeks, which is pretty good. He's not like standing out as an elite tight end play, but I think now with Ridley out, he does have the chance to emerge a bit. And with as poor as Gage was in this game, I think he could, potentially be the number 2 guy in week 9 with Ridley out. So little bit of a spot for Hayden Hurst to see what he has. Moving to Baltimore. At running back, J.K. Dobbins had an 11.8 expected points in this one. He went 15 for 113 yards on the ground. He got 2 targets, which he turned into 1 reception for 8 yards. And he had 2.9 points over expectation in this game. So played pretty well. Gus Edwards had 9.7 expected points right there with Dobbins. He had 3.4 points over expectation. He had the only green zone attempt in the backfield in this game, which he did score on. Went 16 for 87 for 1 in this game. So this is looking like a split backfield. Justice Hill nicely not involved. We don't need this to be a 3-man backfield here. And Justice Hill had just 2% of snaps. So that was pretty good. Looking like a pretty clear split, right? 11.8 to 9.7. But the snaps here tell a different story than that. J.K. Dobbins was in on 66% of snaps. Edwards, just 32%. So it does look like Dobbins is kind of playing ahead. It's like a 2-to-1 split in terms of the snaps. And those snaps are really important. It's possible that Mark Ingram comes back and slots back in for Edwards as that kind of short yardage guy, the more 2-down grindery role. And then Dobbins continues in the same role that he has. It could be just hope because I think Dobbins looks really, really strong. He was able to produce over expectations despite not getting the chance to score a touchdown. So that's just him running really well. And it's possible that this does turn back into an ugly 3-man committee with Ingram coming back. But we will get one more data point here because it does look like Ingram's likely to miss week 9. And at the very least, Dobbins, I think, looks like the better play with Ingram out again. He does lack some of that touchdown equity that Edwards has. But I think if anyone's going to kind of blow up and put up a really nice fantasy game, it's Dobbins. Edwards looks more like he can kind of save his, like if you start him in the flex, he can kind of save your day with a touchdown, short yardage touchdown. At wide receiver, Marquise Brown ran a route on 95% of dropbacks. He had just an 8% target share in this game, just 3% of the air yards. This is a dude who has had an elite whopper all season, just 0.13 here, which is bad. So this was a bizarre game for him. And it was even more bizarre because you think, okay, if Marquise Brown is not going to have this awesome game, then surely we'll get this spike week from Mark Andrews. But instead, it was Willie Snead. Willie Snead ran a route on 78% of dropbacks. He had 27% target share, 37% air yard share, a whopper of 0.66, weighted target per out run of 0.59. Really, really strong game from Willie Snead. Unexpectedly, obviously. Miles Boykin, I'll note here, scored a touchdown, but ran a route on only 35% of dropbacks. Devin Duvernay still playing clearly ahead of him. Duvernay ran a route on 51% of dropbacks. James Prochet also now getting mixed in. So Boykin here, just noise. But yeah, the thing with Snead is that it hurt Andrews to some degree. Although Andrews, there was still a little bit of meat on the bone here. He ran around on 78% of dropbacks. Pretty nice for a tight end. Target share 23%. Also nice for a tight end. Target per route run of 21%, which is pretty good. 19% of air yards. So all of these are good numbers for a tight end, but he had just 5.3 yards per target this week. And therefore, he only put up 3 for 32 receiving. So this was really Mark Andrews' fault that he didn't have the game that he could have had. I mean, here on the chart, you see literally Mark Andrews and Willie Snead are like on top of each other. They're dots right here. So they got the same opportunity. Now, Willie Snead had a lot more air yards, 37% to 19% for Andrews, but Andrews could have had a much stronger receiving day, just didn't convert. So what does this mean? It doesn't really mean anything from the perspective of Mark Andrews, like being a good player or bad player. We know that Mark Andrews can play, but it is frustrating because this is a low enough volume offense that, and we got a week where Marquise Brown wasn't involved and Mark Andrews left it on the field. So it's just going to hurt with this offense unless they are able to get right and Lamar Jackson's passing increases. Then when Andrews can't put the efficiency with the volume, it's really going to hurt because that volume isn't always going to be there in this offense. Moving to Buffalo, Zach Moss had 53% of the snaps in this game, 11.5 expected points. He had 8.6 points over expected. He had 4 green zone attempts in this game, and both of his touchdowns came on green zone attempts. So that's why he had those fantasy points over expected. Getting in the end zone will do that for you. Devin Singletary had 48% of the snaps. He had 8 expected points. He played pretty well too with 2.2 points over expectation. He went 14 for 86. Moss went 14 for 81, but got the 2 touchdowns. Both guys got targeted once. Only Singletary had a reception for just 6 yards. No other running back had an offensive snap. So this was looking like dead even split, right? However, it looks like a split in the receiving game as well, which is not what we would expect. We'd expect that Moss would, if it's going to be a dead even split, Moss would have the advantage on the goal line, but Singletary would have an advantage as a receiver. That wasn't the case this week. I would still expect Singletary to have more receiving work in general, but it's not great that he gave up 4 green zone attempts to Moss here, and then they tied in targets. So all this to say, I think Moss is the play going forward. I think that in general, this is an offense where we'd rather have the guy with the goal line role. So even if this week is a mirage and Singletary does have a bigger advantage in the receiving game than he showed this week, this is not an offense that's really supporting receiving from the running back. Singletary has a yards per route run this year of just 0.92. Moss is even worse at 0.66. TJ Yeldon is also below 1. So this offense isn't really generating a lot of value to its running backs in the receiving game. It is also an offense where Josh Allen can steal rushing touchdowns. So the goal line role isn't necessarily super secure either. But if I have to pick one in this offense, I would rather have the guy with a clear lead on the other running back at the goal line, as opposed to a guy who may have a lead in the receiving game. So I think Zach Moss is the way to go here going forward, although Singletary is still looking like a flexible option. At wide receiver, when this offense starts clicking again, Diggs is going to smash. He ran a route here on 95% of dropbacks. He had a 50% target share, a 53% air yard share. He had a metric-breaking 1.12 whopper this week, targeted on 38% of his routes. He was still efficient on this huge volume on a per-target basis, 11.5 yards per target. So he had a yards per route run of 4.38, which is absurd. The Bills only, though, had 22 dropbacks in this game. So that's really obviously going to limit Stephon Diggs here. If he catches a better game environment, though, he has immense upside. And by the way, the Bills play Seattle this week. John Brown, he ran a route on 95% of dropbacks, an 11% target share, and 8 out of just 2. Kind of weird. We've seen this a couple times from Brown where he's had these really, really shallow ADOTs. I think that it's like he tends to get targeted on some screens, and then if he doesn't end up getting targeted on his deeper routes, then it can kind of skew his ADOT short. Cole Beasley ran a route on 82% of dropbacks. He had an 11% target share as well, and just 4% of air yards and ADOT of just 3.5. Gabriel Davis ran a route on 45% of dropbacks, so pretty far down, obviously, from where he'd been when he was filling in for John Brown. But he was targeted on 20% of his routes, and he had an ADOT of 29.5. So that's nice to see. Weighted target per route run of 0.83, which is basically an elite level in that metric. 33% of the air yards in this game while running just 45% of routes. That's how you get that weighted target per route run up that high. So yeah, that's nice. However, we're talking about 2 targets. So, because we are dealing with such a small sample here, the 20% target per route run is nice. The weighted target per route run is nice, but he got 2 long targets and he didn't catch either. So still work to do here. I do like that he's at least getting the targets, because when he was filling in for John Brown, he just wasn't getting any targets at all. So it's nice to see that he's getting used a little bit deep downfield, but yet to connect, yet to really make an impact. At tight end, Tyler Kroft ran around on 55% of dropbacks. Had just an 8% target per route run here. Dawson Knox didn't even play in this game, and Knox was still just a complete afterthought. So someone you can ignore. In Carolina, Mike Davis was in on 85% of snaps. The only running back here to get an offensive snap. He had 9.4 expected points, a little bit inefficient on the day with minus 0.7 fantasy points over expectation. 13 for 66 on the ground. Just 2 targets in this game, which was unexpected. We went 1 for 11. It seems like he's kind of petering out with this Christian McCaffrey impression, and hopefully we do get CMC back this week. My expectation is that we probably don't see McCaffrey in his like typical role right away, but I think he is eventually going to get back to that bell cow usage. The one question is does Curtis Samuel keep mixing in? He had 2.9 rushing expected points in this game. He scored from an up the middle rush from the 12 in this game. So it's, he's played pretty well. He seems to have some juice. He seemed to be completely out of favor a couple weeks ago, and now they're getting him involved in the rushing game. He was also involved in the receiving game here. He ran a route on 88% of dropbacks. He had a 19% target share, a 26% air yard share, a whopper of 0.47. Got in the end zone. So Samuel really coming on here a little bit, but he isn't yet really cutting into the top 2 wide receivers volume all that much. Obviously, a little bit frustrating. I think he's probably a guy that's going to be frustrating for whoever you own in this offense, whether it's Anderson, Moore, or McCaffrey. But I don't know that he'll ultimately end up hurting any one player all that much. And he is also going to be tough to trust on his own. Robbie Anderson here was the wide receiver 1 again this week. He ran a route on 94% of dropbacks, had a 31% target share, 32% air yard share, and a whopper of 0.68. Dude is a wide receiver 1. Not too much left to say with Robbie Anderson. He's having a great season. DJ Moore ran a route on 97% of dropbacks. He had a 23% target share, a 40% air yard share. So he was behind Anderson in target share, 31 to 23, but ahead in air yard share, 40 to 32%. And DJ Moore not far off Anderson's whopper, therefore. Anderson had a 0.68 whopper to DJ Moore's 0.63. So DJ Moore also profiling like a wide receiver 1 type. They just happen to have 2 wide receiver 1s in this offense. I will say that there was a little bit interesting that Moore was again operating as a deep threat. He had an 8 out of 14.8, Anderson at 8.8. There was kind of this question a few weeks back if Moore was actually now going to play the shallow role and Anderson was play the deeper role. That kind of ended up being a blip. But it's nice to know that it's not like guaranteed that these guys are going to be locked into specific roles that just are never going to change. If it ends up being the case that that they can attack the defense with more shallow, it seems like they will do that. It's just on a given week, it's more likely that Moore is going to be in that deeper role, which is going to make him a higher variance play, but also gives him some upside. So neither wide receiver here had a great game in the box score, but the underlying opportunity was still very strong for both guys. At tight end, Ian Thomas ran a route on 82% of dropbacks and had a target per route run of just 11%. He's running a huge number of routes. 82% of dropbacks is a lot for a tight end, but he's just unable to earn targets, someone you can continue to ignore. Moving to Chicago, David Montgomery played 84% of snaps. He had an elite workload of 21.2 expected points, but he left 8.7 points on the field, including 2 green zone attempts. So pretty rough game efficiency-wise from David Montgomery, and this is in a game where he had a 38-yard run, but he only went 21 for 89 and no touchdowns in a game where he had a 38-yard run. So really kind of nuts. I mean, he did also have 5 targets for 2 receptions, 16 yards. So continues to be pretty involved as a receiver with Cohen out. But I don't know, man. I mean, he left 8.7 points on the field. And at the same time, I feel like this might have been a ceiling game because he finally had the long run. I mean, I'm not kidding. Like, this is probably going to be the longest run of his career based on what we've seen from this guy. He never breaks big runs, gets the 38-yarder here, and yet in what might be kind of a career game in some ways, very inefficient overall. So, yeah, I'm obviously pretty frustrated with David Montgomery. I don't really own him anywhere, but just like the opportunity that he's getting and the opportunity that he could give us is like a daily play. It's really hard. It's really hard to consider playing him because he's just unable to live up to the opportunity that he's getting. Ryan Nall was in on just 3% of snaps. So at the very least, because Montgomery has no competition, he does remain a very high floor option. At wide receiver, Allen Robinson ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 17% and a 27% air yard share, a whopper of 0.45. Not a huge game from Allen Robinson, a bit of a down game in terms of opportunity, but did go 6 for 87 for 1, so kind of salvaged what was a little bit of a lower opportunity day than we're used to. Darnell Mooney ran a route on 98% of dropbacks here. He had a 15% target share and a 31% air yard share, and had a whopper of 0.44, so barely behind Robinson this week. And he went 5 for 69 and 1, a nice game for Mooney. Anthony Miller ran a route on 85% of dropbacks, which is pretty interesting because Chicago had been running a lot of these 2 tight end sets in the early part of the season, and Miller was having trouble getting his route percentage up. But if he is going to be running routes around this 85%, that's a big deal in terms of making Miller like somewhat interesting. He had a 27% target share, a 21% air yard share, a 0.55 whopper, a weighted target per route run of 0.62, which is pretty strong. So Miller had a really nice game here. I'm not counting on this offense to support multiple options. Really besides Robinson, it's going to be probably one of Miller and Mooney. Recently, before this week, it's been kind of obvious that you play Mooney because he's out there all the time, running around on 98% of dropbacks and playing really strong. But I think Miller, here showed that he can have the biggest slice of the offense if he is out there more. And it would make sense that he's out there more because Miller, maybe he's not like a world-class wide receiver, but he's got to be better than the corpse of Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham ran a route on 59% of dropbacks. He had a 26% target per route run, a weighted target per route run of 0.6. Both are elite marks for tight end. Dude is getting elite volume. He had a 1.9 yards per target, which is not elite, which is awful. I mean, it's yards per target. It's not sticky, but God, just left so much on the field this week. Would love to see the route run percentage for Jimmy Graham come down at 59%. It could come down way below that. We could maybe even drop the 5. Just a clean 9% would be much nicer. Cole Kmet, he ran a route on 33% of dropbacks, which was a season high. So it's easy to see how we get Jimmy Graham out of the offense is that they phase in Cole Kmet. But Cole Kmet actually only had a 7% targets per route run in this game, a yards per target of just 2. So he was also not good in this game. If these tight ends aren't ready, well, Graham is he is ready to retire. Kmet is not ready, it seems like, maybe to take on a huge role. It would be nice to see them continue to kind of split this one tight end role and have it be a 3 wide receiver set. That makes a lot more sense, I think, than trying to force these 2 tight end sets like they were doing earlier in the season. That is what we saw this week. Hopefully that continues going forward. In Cincinnati, Giovanni Bernard played on 64% of snaps and had 14.8 expected points. He ran pretty hot this week with 8 points over expectation. He had 1 green zone attempt and 1 green zone target. He scored on the target, but not the attempt, but then he ran in a touchdown from 12 yards out. So nice game for Bernard, but the underlying stats were a little concerning compared to what we saw the week before. Samaje Perine was in on 33% of snaps this week. He had 9.4 expected points, so he stole a meaningful amount of work here. He also had 2 green zone attempts. So this is something, in the end, he got in the end zone. If Mixon comes back after the bye, which it appears that he's likely to do, then I think, obviously it's Mixon's backfield. But if he doesn't come back, then I would tread carefully with Bernard. This was much closer to a split than we saw in week 7. A note here on Travion Williams. He had 0 offensive snaps. He's a guy that I think is a drop even in deep dynasty leagues. He'd been kind of a sleeper name for a while. But if he can't even get in these situations, I don't think they really have any plans for him. At wide receiver, T. Higgins, not technically the wide receiver 1 here. He only ran a route on 74% of dropbacks, but looking pretty clear that he should be the wide receiver 1 here. He had a target share of 26%, a 35% air yard share, a whopper of 0.63, a 32% target per route run. And this is that weighted target per route run type of guy, right? Because he's only in on 74% of dropbacks, but he's a guy that could be in 95% of dropbacks if he does become the wide receiver one. And the weighted target per route run of 0.77 is saying if he does take over that wide receiver one role, he is getting targeted at an extremely high rate, getting a lot of valuable targets, getting a lot of those air yards. So with an ADOT of 8.8, it's not necessarily even that he's racking up like just a bunch of air yards through deep shots. He's getting a lot of those intermediate air yards. And Sam Hoppen had some cool stuff on this. Check out his Twitter feed at Sam Hoppen for more on these intermediate air yards. But basically, you can get air yards a couple different ways. You can get them by going super deep downfield like Gabriel Davis got him this week or Jalen Guyton does. But you can also get them by just racking up intermediate targets, and that tends to be a bit more valuable. So T. Higgins really profiling just as a highly valuable role. Hopefully he gets out there more, and we see that route run percentage increase. He had a yards per route run in this game of 2.79, which is elite. So he is doing his part. Now we need the Bengals to do their part and get him on the field more. Tyler Boyd, he is currently the wide receiver one in this offense. Ran a route on 92% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 20%. He had an air yard share of 23%. He had a whopper of 0.64, which is pretty solid. A yards per route run of 1.91, which is pretty good. So good, solid day from Tyler Boyd. He's not the guy that I think should be seeding routes. The guy who should be seeding routes is AJ Green. He ran a route on 87% of dropbacks. Why is he running a route on 87% of dropbacks and Higgins is only in on 74%? That is frustrating. Green had a target share of 14%. He had an air yard share of 18%, a whopper of just 0.34, a yards per target of 3.8. Not efficient in terms of generating targets, not efficient when he got them. Yards per target, it's not sticky, but he's at 5.1 on the season. Higgins is popping off right now with a 9.6 yards per target, which isn't even like that crazy high. It's just good. So, I would just like to see that Higgins, who clearly looks like a future star, gets more playing time. Green is a free agent after the year. It would make sense that they kind of phase him out of the offense more given the play between the two players. So hopefully we do see that. Auden Tate was involved this week, which was a bit of a surprise. He ran a route on 42% of dropbacks. He had a 44% target per route run, which is pretty nuts. 8 out of only 5.4, though. So he was pretty shallow. And I wonder if he almost was like playing a tight end type of role in the offense this week because Drew Sample, he remained on the field a fair amount this week, but a 4% target per route run, which is unbelievably bad. Ran a route on 63% of dropbacks, which I think means that the Bengals were in empty backfield a fair amount because with Tate, Higgins, Green, and Boyd all out there with Sample, they would have overlapped. So they must have been in empty backfield for some. It would be interesting to see if that type of deployment continues when Mixon is back. But for now, I'm betting that Tate's involvement was probably a blip. Moving on to the Cleveland Browns. Kareem Hunt played 86% of snaps, continued to really lock up this backfield, but there's just has not been that much value in this backfield. It's been a disappointing stretch for Hunt where it seemed like he could really pop off as this elite running back with Chubb out. And he did get the elite snap shares. 86% is an elite snap share. Dearness Johnson had just 12%. But he wasn't able to generate elite expected points workloads. In this game, just 10.9. He also did not play all that well, had a negative 1.6 fantasy points over expectations in this game. So only lost 2.2 points, 2.2 expected points to Dearness Johnson, but just generating the 10.9, the offense generating 10.9 for him is tough. 0 green zone opportunities for this entire backfield. Nick Chubb looking like he may be back after their week 9 bye. So the party kind of might be over for Hunt here. And he was let down, I think, by the offense, which didn't really provide all that much value for the backfield in Chubb's absence. At wide receiver, Jarvis Landry ran a route on 83% of dropbacks. He had a 44% target share, 57% air yard share, a whopper of 1.06, which is ridiculous, an elite 0.91 weighted target per route run. Just went 4 for 52, though. So left a lot out there on the field. It looks like he's clearly not healthy. I think he re-aggravated the rib injury that he has, and he's just banged up right now and kind of just getting through it. But the volume is there. The volume is there. He can have some spike weeks if his health cooperates, and if this volume continues. But man, it was really there for him to have a kind of a huge day. It was there both in the percentage of the offense and just in kind of the raw volume that he was getting. Rashard Higgins ran a route on 79% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 12%, 24% air yard share, and a 0.35 whopper. He's the clear wide receiver 2 in this offense. Kaderil Hodge ran a route on 72% of dropbacks, but was not targeted. That's real gross. Donovan Peoples-Jones ran a route on just 7% of dropbacks. They clearly decided he was not ready for a larger role, which is a bit of a disappointment, considering that he was a little bit exciting filling in for Beckham in week 7. At tight end, Harrison Bryant ran around on 79% of dropbacks in this game, which is a lot for a tight end. He had a 13% targets per route run, which is low, and just a whopper of 28.28. Not great. David Njoku ran a route on 45% of dropbacks. His targets per route run was much better at 23%, and had a 12% target share. So basically right there with Bryant on a much lower route run percentage. He had a 0.23 whopper, which is a little bit further below where Bryant was because he was targeted more shallowly. Njoku's played well. He's looked good in his limited opportunity, but it does look like Bryant's going to be the tight end 2 when Austin Hooper returns here. Moving on to Dallas, Ezekiel Elliott, he played 78% of the snaps. He had 14.1 expected points. Really inefficient day, minus 5.8. He left 5.8 points on the field on this 14.1 expected points workload. Took 19 carries for just 63 yards. He got 2 targets, which he turned into 1 for 10. Tony Pollard only played on 22% of snaps. He got 6.1 expected points. He was efficient, putting up 2.3 points over expected. He went 7 for 40. He got 2 targets as well, which he turned into 2 for 24. I think Pollard is looking like the better running back right now. Zeke has had 3 really bad games in a row. And I wonder if Pollard's role grows with the season clearly lost. Do they look like they're turning to practice squad quarterback for this week? The season has just gone down the drain here. I would be curious to see if they do incorporate Pollard anymore. There's a chance, though, that they just decide, no, what's the point? Because they can't even cut Zeke until after the 2022 season. So it's not like seeing what they have in Pollard, it'd be nice, but they can see it in small samples over the next 2.5 seasons because Zeke's their guy for 2021 and 2022. So yeah, I kind of lean towards the status quo probably sticking because the contract almost forces it. In Dynasty, I think, Zeke's not going to have a catastrophic loss in value because of that contract. That's the bottom line. I think if you have Zeke, it probably makes sense to try to hold him through this offseason, wait until Dak gets back, wait until things kind of get back and where this offense, people start to be excited about it again. That said, if someone was willing to give me value for Zeke like he's still an elite dynasty running back, I would take that because I do think about like Zeke could be valued pretty soon here, kind of close to what Melvin Gordon was valued heading into this season, right? Where it's kind of like a formerly elite talent now playing with another running back who's showing some stuff, and we have questions about this offense, right? That's kind of like where Zeke is right now. So, I wouldn't panic on Zeke, but I think there's some real downside in terms of his perceived value, and not a player I would want to be on, if at all possible, in Dynasty. At wide receiver, Amari Cooper ran a route on 87% of dropbacks. He had a 13% target share and a 12% air yard share, a whopper of just 0.28. A really rough game here. Just went 1 for 5. Should be okay going forward, but disappointing that the floor is this low. We didn't think it would be this low with Cooper, but this is where we're at with this offense right now. CeeDee Lamb ran around on 67% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 13% and 12% of the air yards. He had a whopper of 0.28 as well. The thing that's concerning with Lamb is running routes on 67% of dropbacks in this game. Cooper at least was up at 87%. So yeah, he didn't get the targets, but he was out there. Lamb wasn't even out there all the time. And this is something that we've seen over multiple weeks where Lamb isn't out there for a true full slate of routes. This is not an offense where we can really afford that right now, right? It's a bad offense now. And if we're getting a guy who's with other talented receivers and isn't out there all the time, it's going to make him a kind of spotty flex option, which is where I think Lamb is. He is not a locked-in starter, even if they can figure out quarterback a little bit better than they had this week. Michael Gallup was the bright spot this week, ran around on 89% of dropbacks, 32% target share, 27% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.66. On the season now, he has a whopper of 0.39 to Lamb's 0.41 and Cooper's 0.51. These guys are all pretty close together, and this is not ideal considering the state of the offense. If Dak was playing, I would say Gallup looks like a buy low. He's right there with Lamb, doesn't have the same perception, but he's not because you're not going to want to start him, and really he's kind of more of a reason to be cautious about the more expensive guys for this season. At tight end, Dalton Schultz ran around on 80% of dropbacks. He had a 21% target share, a 23% air yard share, and a target per route run of 22%, which was good. I mean, this was a strong game from Schultz in terms of the opportunity. And, it's another reason to just kind of be worried about what we're going to get out of everyone from this offense, because I think Schultz is good. He's played really well. I think Lamb is really good. Cooper's obviously really good. Gallup's good. There's 4 really strong players who don't have a quarterback and whose offensive line has suffered a ton of injuries. So it's just a really unfortunate situation where you do still have the weapons here, but now they're going to be cannibalizing each other without the quarterback play to go with it. At Denver, Melvin Gordon, he played 55% of snaps in this game. He had a 13.4 expected points workload, played somewhat inefficiently, leaving 2.7 points on the field, went 8 for 26, got 7 targets in this game, which he turned into 6 for 21. Phillip Lindsay played 45% of the snaps, kind of the 1B running back. He had 7.1 expected points, so pretty far behind in the actual workload, basically getting half of what Gordon got, but he was much, much more efficient. He had 8.5 points over expected. Obviously had that really long 55-yard touchdown. But, my gripe with Lindsay is not that he's not good, right? It's that I don't trust his usage. They clearly just don't want to use him in the ways that they should be using him. Basically, he's a version of Ronald Jones that I'm rational about, right? I'm not going to keep chasing Lindsay, even though I think he is better than the coaches do. I do hope that his role increases going forward. He got just 6 carries here, turned that into 83 yards and a touchdown. But, it's frustrating too because he's second fiddle in the passing game. Only got 3 targets to Melvin Gordon's 7 in this game. So just unfortunate, I think. At wide receiver, I will mention Royce Freeman got no offensive snaps in this game. Jeremy Cox got 9%. So Royce Freeman can be dropped everywhere, I think. Even in Dynasty, I think, he's someone maybe you can bid on again if Gordon or Lindsay goes down, but not someone with a ton of value. At wide receiver, Judy ran around on 91% of dropbacks, 26% target share, 52% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.76, which which is really nice. He had a weighted target per route run of 0.75, which is elite or borderline elite. He had, number one wide receiver opportunity all around. Did not get in the end zone. Locke, though, missed him on what could have been a long touchdown. Just kind of missed through it. It was really frustrating. I believe that turned into an interception as well. But yeah, was interesting in this game because he did get used deep, Judy. He was used at an ADOT of 16.2, which with KJ Hamler in the game, you would think maybe Hamler was the guy used deep. He was not. He had a 3.3 ADOT. Hamler ran a route on 89% of dropbacks, so he was out there a lot. Targeted or got just 8% of the targets and had just 3% of the air yards. Little bit, unexpected to see Judy getting targeted deep. Judy got a bunch of volume. Could have been a really, really big day for him. Deshaun Hamilton was out there even more than Hamler, actually. He ran a route on 93% of dropbacks. He had a 13% target share, 18% air yard share. If you're throwing darts beyond Jerry Judy, it looks like Deshaun Hamilton. Although, once Tim Patrick is back, that won't really matter. At tight end, Noah Fant ran a route on 75% of dropbacks. He had a 27% target per route run, a 0.62 weighted target per route run, which is really nice, a 0.5 whopper. This is an elite tight end profile. I think that if people are thinking Albert Okwebunam is going to lower Fant in terms of his value, then take advantage of that. Fant came back finally fully healthy, it looks like, was out there for 75% of dropbacks and had this very elite tight end target profile. So really excited about what we saw here from Fant, and it might go a little bit under the radar since Albert O got in the end zone here. He actually got targeted on another play that was called back for penalty and didn't show up in the stats, but ran a route on a much lower percentage of dropbacks and was targeted on just 8% of his routes. So not impressed with Albert O's workload in this game. I didn't write down the percentage of dropbacks, but I believe it was down in the 20% range. You can see here on the chart, it's just over 25% route run per dropback. So not great from Albert O, and just had the one target that he did get the touchdown on, but the usage was not there. So I would say just don't be fooled by the touchdown here. Sorry, Davis, if you're listening. I know you like Albert O. I think he's good. But they don't seem to be, they seem to have Fant right back into that role that he was in, which is a pretty dominant role for a tight end. Moving to Detroit. So this was a pretty good week, actually, for DeAndre Swift in the underlying numbers. Okay, so it was a frustrating week for DeAndre Swift, who produced just 1 yard on 6 carries. He added 3 for 22 on 4 targets, but he was in on 62% of snaps. Adrian Peterson down to 20%. Kerrane Johnson at 18%. He only had 8.1 expected points, which isn't great. It's not even really good. But Peterson was at 3.9 and Kerrane was at 3.9. So, he almost, I guess he did have like double what the other two guys had combined. And Kerrane Johnson did get in the end zone here. And Swift was actually inefficient in this game. But the thing I think to pay attention to is the snap counts, right? Because last week, Kerrane Johnson didn't see a touch, but he was still involved on 23% of the snaps. So that should have been a little bit of a warning sign that he could come in and do something crappy like steal a touchdown, which he did. But now we're actually seeing a nice story in the snaps for next week, where we see Swift increasing from 45% up to 62%, and Adrian Peterson decreasing from 31% last week to 20% this week. Is Adrian Peterson finally being phased out of this offense? If he is, that's very bullish for DeAndre Swift. Is it frustrating that Kerrane's still involved right around 20% like he was last week and this week? Yes, it's very frustrating. Would it be much better if Adrian Peterson was phased out completely instead of down at 20%? Yeah, of course. But, to see DeAndre Swift up above 60% of snaps is bullish. This offense did not generate much value for the backfield overall. We had Kerrane getting in on kind of a high efficiency score. So I think the underlying takeaway is that Swift remains a very strong buy, and that although this is a disappointing week, this actually kind of builds his case going forward. At wide receiver, Kenny Golladay was knocked out of the game in the first half with a hip injury. He's going to miss at least week 9. On a per route basis, he was awesome. Again, an elite 0.74 weighted target per route run, or borderline elite. May struggle without the offense. May struggle without his ability to get deep and still dominate targets. Right, I've talked about this before, but Golladay is one of these unique wide receivers, kind of like Julio Jones can be, where he is going to play deeper downfield than a lot of wide receiver ones, but he still gets that huge target workload. And I think he really allows the rest of the offense to operate efficiently. Hopefully, someone can fill in that role to the extent that it still keeps opening up things underneath enough for the guys like TJ Hockenson, which I'll get to. But the guy who would fill in that Golladay role looks to be right now Marvin Hall. To start the season, it was Quintus Cephas, but in this game, when Golladay went down, Marvin Hall was filling in on that deep threat role. He had an 8 out of 16.4, ran a route on 67% of dropbacks. He actually had a nice target volume in this. He had a whopper of 0.46, but remember, he wasn't in there for all the routes because Golladay didn't, he played some of the game. Marvin Hall on a per route basis had a weighted target per route run of 0.61, which is nice. And he went 4 for 113 on the game. So if Marvin Hall can play like this, kind of be like a poor man's Kenny Golladay, but enough productive enough to keep defenses honest, then that's really good for the other guys in this passing game. It's probably too late for Marvin Jones most weeks. He did have 2 touchdowns in this game, so kind of proved me wrong a little bit there. But I'm still pretty pessimistic on him going forward. He had 18% target share in this game, ran around on 100% of dropbacks, 21% air yard share, 41% whopper, of 0.41. So pretty solid opportunity numbers. Weighted target per route run, though, of 0.39. He's out there all the time. That's why he's able to get, the decent target share. He probably still will continue to be out there all the time, so maybe it's not fair to penalize him for that. But I'm more excited about Hall, who's doing a lot more on a per route basis. Now Hall looking like he's going to see a lot more playing time. So if I'm betting on a Lions wide receiver, it'd be Hall. There is some question about the role, I guess. Maybe, I don't actually know if Cephas was active for this game, so something to keep an eye on there if there's any talk of Cephas playing a bigger role. But from this game, it looks like Hall is the wide receiver to play in Galladay's absence, and hopefully he could play well enough to keep targets open for TJ Hockenson, who ran a route on 71% of dropbacks, had a target per route run of 26%, which is really nice, a whopper of 0.49, and a weighted target per route run of 0.61, which is really good for a tight end. Profiling like a borderline elite tight end here. I think, like I've been saying, this is basically what we're hoping for going forward, that Marvin Hall can generate a lot of volume, but not as much volume as Kenny Golladay did, but enough to keep defenses honest, and then they're able to go to Hockenson a lot underneath. Could be ultimately a good thing if Galladay's knocked out and replaced by Hall, if they kind of follow the template that they put down this week. Moving on to Green Bay. Green Bay, I'm realizing I'm getting texts, which you guys may be seeing as they come in. I should have turned those off. Yeah, you're seeing text as let me try to turn these off. All right, so Green Bay, the Jamal Williams had 85% of snaps He had a expected points workload of 18.2. He was right at efficiency, fantasy points over expected of 0, played exactly to the workload that he got. Went 16 for 75 on the ground, had 6 for 6 for 27 through the air. Now on the COVID list, though, need to monitor his status. It looks like Jones is probably going to be back this week, but obviously a lot to monitor here with Green Bay. Tyler Ervin was in on 27% of snaps. He had 4.3 expected points, not efficient, though. He had minus 2.6 fantasy points over expected. Just had no carries and 3 targets, which he turned into 1 for 7. A.J. Dillon played 13% of snaps, 3.8 expected points. He added almost a point, 0.9 points over expected. Went 5 for 21 on the ground, had 1 target for 1 reception and 16 yards. Yeah, Williams continued to operate as the workhorse here. Ervin and Dillon kind of combined to form a backup running back. There's a narrative here that Williams has a bigger role than Aaron Jones when Jones is out. And that's true, actually, from a snap share perspective. Jones has peaked at 71% this year. Williams up at 85%. So that just doesn't happen. Jones never gets up to that snap share because he has to split with Williams. But Jones has topped the expected point workload that Williams had this week of 18.2 points. Jones has topped that in 4 of 5 games he's played this season. So Jones really does get this incredible workload that Williams hasn't really gotten. So I think that narrative is somewhat misleading in that it kind of downplays the role that Aaron Jones gets. And I think that's because he's Aaron Jones. And I think he'll slot right back into that highly valuable workload when he returns. Devontae Adams is dominating targets and is the only receiver really that you can trust in this passing game. He ran a route on 95% of dropbacks, had 31% target share, a 39% air yard share, an elite whopper of 0.73. He had 3 touchdowns. This dude is like truly an elite wide receiver. I think everyone else in this offense is hard to trust here. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, he's seeing Equanimeous St. Brown cut into his role a bit. And that's not something he can really afford, given that Adams is now back and dominating targets as usual. MVS ran a route on 82% of dropbacks, which isn't terrible. He had an 8 out of 18, which is typical. He's always running deep downfield. But Equanimeous St. Brown ran a route on 39% of dropbacks in that same role with an 8 out of 20.7. MVS only had 1 target in this game. Equanimeous St. Brown had 3 and a 20% share of the air yards. So MVS already a pretty high variance option. This is not a good development, especially considering Allen Lazard not back yet and will be. So, even when Lazard gets back, I think that he kind of plays like a wide receiver 3 role where the deep threat is the number 2 option. Then Lazard's kind of the number 3 option, maybe even the number 4 option, depending on how this tight end situation plays out. Robert Tonyan right now, kind of in a split with Jay Sternberger. Tonyan ran a route on 55% of dropbacks this week. He had a target per route run of 25%, which is good, but not out there as much as we'd like to see because Jay Sternberger ran a route on 32% of dropbacks, and he had a 29% target per route run, so played well. Both tight ends ran hot in yards per target. They were both targeted at a high rate. So really good weeks for both guys, but they're cannibalizing each other. And this is a situation kind of like the Rams, like we'll get to, where I think both these guys can probably play, but if they're both going to play at the same time, it's going to be hard to trust them. Tunyan's obviously the guy over Sternberger right now, but Sternberger does look like he's going to hurt his value. The Rams is kind of a bit more of a mess, like we'll get to here in a few minutes. Moving to the Colts. Man, the Colts, this was gross at running back. This was gross. I mean, it wasn't gross, right? It was actually great if we had known who to play. And we thought to play Jonathan Taylor, but that was not the play. It was the only wrong play. Jordan Wilkins had a clear lead in snaps this week with 51% of the snaps. Jonathan Taylor only had 34% of the snaps. Nyheim Hines had 21%. Hines got 2 receiving touchdowns in this game, though, and Wilkins had 1. So, Hines got there on a very small workload, snap-wise. And I think that is probably a bit fluky. Although I will say, in terms of the expected points, Hines did have 10.3 expected points. So not a ton of the snap share, but they were looking for him when he was out there. Wilkins had 16 expected points to go with his big lead in snaps. Taylor did at least have a decent expected points workload compared to his snaps of 13.6 expected points, only just 34% of the snaps. So he was involved when out there, but just not out there all that much. However, Taylor left 8.5 points on the field. It's really bad. It's really bad. Failed to convert on a green zone carry and target. At this point, it is worth noting that both Hines and Wilkins are under contract for next season. When Marlon Mack went down, it was like, this has been unlocked for Taylor. But Wilkins is playing awesome right now, and Wilkins is under contract for next year. So we need to factor this in at this point for Dynasty. This could be, and it probably is likely to be, a 3 running back committee in 2021. At this point, I think you'd really prefer to be on DeAndre Swift than Jonathan Taylor. Swift was considered by some to be the better running back prospect. I personally thought Taylor was the running back prospect, just given how productive he was. But now we're seeing them at the NFL level. And man, I am excited about Swift, as you guys have obviously gotten. I'm sure you've picked up on that over the last few weeks. I've become increasingly excited on Swift and his usage. You've got Adrian Peterson is not likely to be there next year. I think there could be a new coaching staff there next year. I think that could really help unlock Swift. He could potentially be a workhorse. And even if he isn't, he could kind of have that Aaron Jones style where he's only out there for maybe 60, 70% of the snaps, but getting really, really valuable touches. So yeah, at this point, I want Swift over Jonathan Taylor. I do. I don't know. I mean, Wilkins is going to be there. Hines is going to be there. Am I panicking on Taylor? Do I want to just take any old running back for Taylor? No. I think Taylor is still a very valuable asset. I think I don't want to abandon my prior this early on that he's a strong running back prospect after not starting his NFL career super hot as a running back. I mean, we've seen guys like, Todd Gurley not be all that efficient in his rookie year. Le'Veon Bell was not efficient in his rookie year. I don't think it's the end of the world that he's not having the super efficient rookie year. I'm more concerned with how things are profiling with the usage going forward. And it does look like the usage could be a problem beyond just this year. There was talk that he had like an ankle injury, but that seems to be something that came up more after the game and not something that really drove this usage. So yeah, at this point, it is starting to become concerning for Jonathan Taylor. At wide receiver, T.Y. Hilton, he left this game with a groin injury. He may miss week 9, but it wasn't like he was dominant before he left. He had a weighted target per route run of just 0.2, which is bad. Looking pretty washed. Zach Pascal likely to operate as the wide receiver 1 if Hilton does end up missing time. He ran a route on 83% of dropbacks, 18% target share, 29% air yard share, a whopper of 0.55. Yeah, pretty good. I think he probably is looking at some nice volume here for as long as Hilton is out. Michael Pittman ran a route on 56% of dropbacks and saw just 1 target. He could see his role grow here without Hilton. This was his first game back, so maybe that they're just kind of bringing him on slowly. I think the 55% of dropbacks is certainly lower than we can expect once he gets fully healthy. He was behind Marcus Johnson in this game, so it's not a guarantee that his role increases, but I do expect it to. At tight end, Trey Burton is a goal line tight end, stealing goal line rushes in wildcat formation. It's weird, but it's happened a couple times now, so maybe it's something that'll happen again. Ran a route on just 42% of dropbacks, though. So that's bad. That's not what we want to see from a tight end. Just not getting out there enough. Jack Doyle, Mo Ali Cox are out there too much for us to really trust Burton. Those guys combined for 54% of the snaps, 54% of the dropbacks, and they had 7 targets combined. So yeah, Burton has some touchdown equity, but I wouldn't get too enamored with him, just given that this is actually a 3-way split at the tight end position, which is not ideal. Moving to Kansas City. This was a tough game for trying to figure out this backfield split, right? We have Le'Veon Bell added. We're going to be really focusing on the way they split this out in the first couple games, but the first couple games have been blowouts. So it's really hard to know how much to take away from it. I do think this is sort of a hilarious thing where, we should have gotten a chance for this backfield to really show what it had against an inferior opponent, but the Jets are so focused on shutting down the run that Mahomes just went off, and Mahomes just kind of blew them completely out in just 3 quarters. So we didn't really get all that good of a sense of what this backfield would operate in kind of more positive but not blowout script. CEH had 50% of the snaps here. He had 7.9 expected points, very small workload. He was not efficient on that. He had left 1.8 points on the field. Le'Veon Bell had 26% of the snaps. He had 6.7 expected points, and he was, fine. He had he basically was neutral on his workload, just 0.1 point over expectation. So the expected points are pretty close, and they were close last week. Not exactly 50-50, but close to it. But the snaps tell a different story this week. CEH 2-1. CEH also had a clear lead in snaps last week. It does seem like CEH is the lead running back when they're competitive, but in non-blowout but positive game scripts where they're actually not starting to get in these guys like Darwin Thompson and Darrell Williams and DeAndre Washington, when those guys aren't involved because they're still competitive, then I do think that you could see both these guys get a lot of work. And I think Bell is interesting because he does seem to get a high usage per snap. So when he's out there in games where they're leading, you could see him kind of eat. But we don't really have a clear idea yet. I think it's probably more of it's not. I don't think it's an even split. I think CEH has a lead in this backfield. It's not like a clear lead where Bell is his backup, but I think he is kind of the true 1A to Bell's true 1B, rather than them kind of being in a 50-50 split. But it's really hard to say because we just don't have that much new information since Bell joined that we can trust. At wide receiver, Tyreek Hill ran around on 85% of dropbacks. He had an awesome game in this game, but it was driven on per target efficiency. His weighted target per route run was 0.52, which is fine, but not really in line with what he delivered. But, it's Tyreek Hill. He can be super efficient on a per target basis. That's kind of his thing. So not really to knock the idea of Tyreek Hill, blowing up on a couple splash plays, but just did want to point that out. This was driven more by efficiency than volume this week. Mecole Hardman had a good game. He ran around on 66% of dropbacks. This was second among Chiefs wide receivers this week. He had a weighted target per route run of 0.65, which led all Chiefs wide receivers. This is awesome. Did I suggest subbing him out for Jalen Reagor like seconds before lock in our quad managed team with Hassan and Blair? Yeah, I did. And did Hassan immediately agree? And then we swapped him out. Yeah, we swapped him out. That wasn't fun at 1:00. At least Reagor got in the end zone. Could have gotten in the end zone again, but at least he did get in the once because this was kind of the Hardman breakout game, which was nice to see. However, Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle were still heavily involved. Robinson ran around 66% of dropbacks, Pringle on 51%. So it's tough to know what to take from this. Could Hardman, see his role increase from here? Maybe. But I think he could also see it shrink again. I would kind of lean in that direction. Obviously, my heart is hoping that he gets credit for what he did here on a bigger than expected role. He played pretty damn well. At tight end, Travis. Oh boy. All right. My buddy's calling me. New computer, and I don't know how to. All right. Gotta love it. I've had all sorts of technical difficulties today, so I'm using a new computer, and it's one I have FaceTime set up on. All right. Let's get back to it. At tight end, Travis Kelce keeps proving that he's elite. He ran around on 74% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target per route run, a whopper of 0.53. With Kittle out for the fantasy season, Kelce, I think, is just one of two truly elite tight ends for the remainder of the year. Moving on to the Raiders, Josh Jacobs here played on 67% of snaps, expected point workload of 24.9. Really nice workload, elite workload, but awful efficiency. Left 12.1 points on the field, left 2 touchdowns worth of fantasy points on the field. He went 31 for 128 in this game. He had 1 target, which he did not convert into a reception. This could have been a blow-up game for Jacobs. But, he also did lose 5.5 expected points to Jalen Richard and Devontae Booker. But I think, that's kind of annoying. But the bigger thing here is that he left 12 points on the field himself. However, he did get the workload. He did get the 24.9 expected points. I don't think that'll really change. They're not going to give up on him, right? They do want to utilize him when they can in this big-time rushing role. They might get a chance to do that this week against the Chargers. We just saw a couple weeks ago the Jacksonville Jaguars use this game plan with them with James Robinson. So we could see them run this back. The big workload is exciting to see him get up to almost 25 expected points. That's really exciting. Very few running backs can get up that high. This obviously a disappointing week given the workload, but yeah, next week could be a repeat potentially. At wide receiver, Henry Ruggs ran a route on 90% of dropbacks. He had an 18% target share, a 43% air yard share, a whopper of 0.58, 15.2 ADOT. I would like to see the ADOT a little shallower for Ruggs. It's, I think, a little bit disappointing that we are seeing the ADOT so consistently high with him. You would hope that they would utilize him more, get him involved on some screens, get him involved on some stuff over the middle. The 43% air yard share is really nice. He could have some blow-up games. He did not in this one. He only went 2 for 8. The wind was blowing pretty hard here, which especially hurts this type of role. So I think especially considering that they knew they probably weren't going to be throwing deep for the remainder of the game, it would have been nice to see them involve him a little bit more shallow. But Nelson Aguilar here ran a route on 90% of dropbacks. He had a 9% target share and 8% air yard share. He's definitely the wide receiver 2 in this offense right now, but not sure that it's really going to matter that much in terms of getting consistent value. There's not a ton here. Hunter Renfrow ran a route on 37% of dropbacks. He had an elite weighted target per route run of 0.73, but he was only out there on 37% of dropbacks, targeted on 36% of his routes. Really nice. I'm convinced that they don't let Renfrow play because they think Carr looks for him too much. Every time he's out there, he gets targeted. He had an awesome yards per route run his rookie year. He's been targeted at a very high rate when he's been out on the field this year, but they just have scaled back his routes a lot. I think that they just know if he's on the field that Carr is going to go to him, and they don't want that to happen. So that's my theory on Hunter Renfrow. At tight end, Darren Waller ran a route on 83% of dropbacks. He had a 27% target share, a 9% air yard share, an ADOT of 2.2, which I think this probably is win related that he was targeted so shallow, 2.2. 24% target per route run this week, which is truly an elite mark for a tight end. He is the other guy that I think is that truly elite tight end left now that Kittle is down. Mark Andrews has been too frustrating. I don't think we can say he's an elite tight end. There's some other guys that have really intriguing usage, but haven't really been able to be all that consistent with it, don't have the quarterback play, or have struggled with injuries. I think really it's these two guys, right? It's Waller and Kelsey are kind of the two clear-cut elite tight ends with Kittle down. Moving to the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Jackson played 47% of the snaps. He had 15.3 expected points and was efficient on the day, adding 1.9 points. He has been impressive as a receiver. He had 5 targets in this game, 3 receptions for 53 yards. I definitely underestimated this guy as a receiver. I was looking at what he had been given last year in terms of his receiving workload, and it was not much at all. But he has really proven me wrong about that assessment. My assessment wasn't necessarily on the talent level. It was more on, I just didn't think they'd give him the work, but they have given him the work and he's been great with it. So Justin Jackson, really, really strong. Joshua Kelly, the guy I was more excited about, not strong. It appears that he may have even been benched in this game, according to the Roto World pod. They said that it looked like he got benched after not converting a short yardage rush. And then we saw Troymaine Pope get a ton of run in this game. Pope was in on 29% of snaps. He had 14.5 expected points. He had a big workload in this game. He was also banged up himself, and that led to Kelly coming back in. Kelly had just 5.9 expected points and left 2.4 points on the field. So this is all very concerning development for Kelly. Keep an eye on Pope's health. If Pope is healthy, then he may be playing ahead of Kelly going forward. I don't know. Could have just been them getting frustrated with Kelly, but then Pope played really well. So, or at least he played well. So yeah, this could be something that's a long-term change in terms of the running back tandem. Definitely something to keep a close eye on. Gabe Neighbors here poached a touchdown as well. Just a note. At wide receiver, Keenan Allen, he ran a route on 27%. Ran a route on 96% of dropbacks. Had a 27% target share, 27% air yard share, a whopper of 0.59. This wasn't his biggest game, but he still had pretty strong volume in this game. Still very, very solid, wide receiver one level volume. Mike Williams ran a route on 90% of dropbacks in this game, had a 20% target share, 42% air yard share, a whopper of 0.59. Had a nice week this week. He had an 11.0 yards per target. Looks like a spike week, I would say, but nice that he can have these types of weeks. Jalen Guyton ran a route on 85% of dropbacks. He had 10% target share, 31% air yard share, whopper of 0.36. He continues to run these super, super deep clear out routes, an 8 out of 24.2. It's a really interesting offense. I talked about this last week, and it continues to be these two guys, Mike Williams and Jalen Guyton, running really deep, Keenan Allen playing a bit underneath. You would think that would open up things for the tight end as well, but Hunter Henry is really starting to disappoint me. He ran around on 81% of dropbacks here, which is good, really good for a tight end, but had a target per route run of just 10%. He's now down to 18.7 target per route run on the season. That's below that 20% threshold that I really like to see for tight ends, and he's not getting targeted like super deep, getting a bunch of air yards either. So I'm starting to feel that I've just been too high on him. Starting to change my opinion on Hunter Henry, thinking he was this kind of borderline elite option. I'm starting to think maybe he's not. And one of his best weeks of the season in terms of target per route run was with Taylor. He does not seem to have shown the same connection with Justin Herbert that he had with Tyrod Taylor. So going forward, I'm going to be a bit more cautious with playing Hunter Henry. Moving on to the Rams, Darrell Henderson was knocked out of this game with a hip injury. He played on only 19% of snaps as a result. He had an expected points workload of 6.9 points. Played, basically right at that workload, left 0.1 points on the field. Malcolm Brown played on 60% of snaps. He had 7.2 expected points. Had 0.5 points over expected, so right at his workload as well. Cam Akers played on only 21% of the snaps, had 5.6 expected points in this game. Also kind of right at efficiency with 0.8 points added. So I'm thinking that if Henderson does miss time going forward, that Brown is going to operate as the lead running back, but that Akers probably sees a high usage rate on the field. And so I'm guessing we might see a 2-to-1 snap rate between Brown and Akers, but maybe we do see closer to 50-50 in terms of the expected points. We'll have to see. They've been really reluctant to incorporate Akers, so it could be that the expected points for Akers is really in line with his snap share, and he's got kind of a 2-to-1 ratio with Brown. But Akers, to my eye, he's looked pretty good when given a chance, and hopefully his role increases. At wide receiver, Cooper Kupp ran a route on 98% of dropbacks. He had a 36% target share, a 40% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.82. He had 21 targets. 21 targets. He went only 11, only on 21 targets, 11 receptions. He had 110 yards. I mean, that is a little bit disappointing, right, on 21 targets. But yeah, I mean, massive volume, kind of nice to see that he can soak up this much volume. Does give him a pretty high ceiling if this is in play. Robert Woods ran a route on 90% of dropbacks. He had a 14% target share, a 12% air yard share, kind of fine. Josh Reynolds ran a route on 87% of dropbacks, 14% target share, 12% air yard share. So same as Woods. Kupp soaked up almost all the volume this game. So these guys were kind of left without it. So I think that the nice thing is that we saw a lot of passing volume out of this game, and that historically we've seen a pretty nice split between Woods and Kupp. So not too concerned about the non-Kupp options, although seeing that much of the volume funneled to Kupp in the receiving game, obviously, like I said, does give us a nice ceiling on Kupp. At tight end, I kind of teased this earlier. This situation is gross. Gerald Everett ran around on 44% of dropbacks to Higbee's 38%. So Everett may be the tight end 1A to Higbee's 1B, and Everett played better. He had a target per route run of 29%, Higbee just 17%. I would, at this point, I kind of bet on Higbee preseason, although I have some bets on Everett for cheap. I just like to see one of these guys take over at this point because they're cannibalizing each other, and it's not even like Tunyon and Sternberger where you're like, well, they're cannibalizing each other, but you play Tunyon. Who do you play here? You play no one. You can't really play anybody until the situation resolves itself. Hopefully it resolves itself soon. Moving to Miami, Myles Gaskin is a true workhorse. 88% of the snaps, 20.4 expected points. He had a bad game, left 5.1 points on the field, losing a fumble will kind of do that. Went 18 for 47, though, so not very efficient as a rusher. Did get in the end zone thanks to an interception or fumble return. Either way, the defense got him really close there, and he was able to punch it in. And he had 6 targets in this game, which he only turned into 16 yards on 3 receptions. But the thing is, he only lost 1.9 expected points to Matt Breida. He does look like one of the clearest workhorse running backs in the league right now. I think even more so than a guy like James Robinson, who James Robinson had that awesome workhorse game a couple weeks ago, week 7, right, against the Chargers. But Chris Thompson was out for that game. We do expect Thompson back. So I think this is kind of this type of usage, but he's even doing it with, there's no Chris Thompson to come back. The Matt Breida kind of is the Chris Thompson, and he's not getting any playing time. Jordan Howard kind of consistently now, just a healthy scratch. So Gaskin is someone I'm getting very excited about. I think he could really have some big days if this usage continues. Obviously, we're a little bit concerned about the offense with Tua. Maybe it's not going to be as prolific as it was with Fitzpatrick, although this was a tough matchup. So for Gaskin, I'm mostly feeling bullish that he's getting such a tight grip on the workload. For the wide receivers, it's a little shakier. Devontae Parker, he only ran a route on 71% of dropbacks, which is kind of weird. He had a 9% target share, which is not good, and 1% of the air yards, which is obviously awful. So concerning that he didn't run a full slate of routes. Very concerning that he wasn't generating targets or air yards. Kind of an unexciting role here with Tua. This was a very, very bearish debut for Parker with Tua. Preston Williams, interesting on his end of this, though, because he ran a route on 96% of dropbacks. And keep in mind, this is coming out of a bye week where they changed their quarterback. Now they have Devontae Parker not running full slate of routes, Preston Williams running almost 100% of routes. I didn't see if there was any kind of injury here. If there was, that would change this a little bit, but still, Williams out there 96% wouldn't necessarily, obviously there's going to be 2 guys on the outside, right? So that's like clearly a choice that they made for Williams. And he was actually generating a lot of volume. 23% of targets, 45% of the air yards, a whopper of 0.66. A yards per target here of just 3. So did not take advantage of what was a really, really great opportunity for him. But he may, in fact, be the wide receiver 1 here with Tua now. Something to really keep an eye on. At tight end, Mike Gesicki ran a route on 71% of dropbacks, had 9% target share, 36% air yard share, and a .39 whopper. He had an ADOT of 21. 21 for a tight end. He's basically a deep threat wide receiver. This ADOT is going to make him kind of an interesting flex start throw. But with Tua now, I think he's pretty tough to trust. So I'm not feeling all that bullish on Gesicki, although, obviously, he could have kind of splash plays as other deep threat wide receivers can. And unlike those deep threat wide receivers, he gets tight end eligibility. So certainly you could do worse than, with kind of dart throw type of plays than Gesicki, but it's like a starting tight end. He's going to be really, really variant, even for the tight end position. Moving to Minnesota, Dalvin Cook, man, what a game. He had 88% of the snaps, a truly elite workload of 29.3 expected points. And then he did the Alvin Kamara thing. This is something that really only Alvin Kamara has done this year, where he adds an elite workload level of efficiency to an already elite workload. So he took a 29.3 expected point workload and then added 19 to that in efficiency. I mean, that is just absurd. He went 30 for 163 and 3 touchdowns as a rusher, 2 for 63, and another touchdown as a receiver. He lost just 10% of snaps to Alexander Mattison, lost just 1.3 expected points to Alexander Mattison. Alexander Mattison not involved at all. This was the Dalvin Cook show all the way. Just an amazing game from Dalvin Cook, really kind of reminding us that he does belong in that true elite running back conversation right there with Kamara. Yes, this is kind of a specific game script that he needs to be in because the Minnesota offense is not going to be able to just ride him like this, like they want to. But the fact is they do want to. And when they get the chance to do it, they will. And he is an awesome running back who can kind of deliver on that. Maybe he's kind of a little bit more similar to Derrick Henry, right, than a Kamara, because the right type of game environment needs to set up for him. But when it sets up, he really can smash. At wide receiver, ran a route. Adam Thielen ran a route on 100% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target share, 32% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.65 right there at that kind of wide receiver 1 level. Justin Jefferson ran a route on 93% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target share as well. He had a 68% air yard share, though, getting the deeper stuff, and an elite whopper of 0.96. If the Vikings had been forced to pass in this game, then we could have seen another Justin Jefferson smash game. So something to keep in mind. Kind of interesting, right? You've got Dalvin Cook, who can have these huge explosive games in the right game environments, but in the opposite game environments, it really does look like Justin Jefferson is a guy who can pop off, maybe even more than Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen kind of more like the steady Eddie in this offense. He's probably going to get his regardless of the game script. At tight end, Irv Smith ran a route on 80% of dropbacks. Just an 8% target per route run, though. What's interesting is that Kyle Rudolph was heavily involved, and that didn't really hurt Smith because it does seem like they're running a bunch of 2 tight end sets here. Rudolph was running around on 60% of dropbacks to Smith's 80%. Rudolph not targeted at a high rate either, just 11% target per route run for him. So both guys are out there. That's not hurting. They're not really cannibalizing each other, but neither one able to earn targets all that well. I think that might be a bit more about the players than the system or about them kind of stealing from each other, because they're not really, neither one's getting anything, so they're not really stealing much. Moving to the Patriots. At running back, the snaps and expected points tell a very different story here. We've seen this a couple times this week. By snaps, this was a Rex Burkhead and James White game. Rex Burkhead had 49% of the snaps. White had 48% of the snaps. Damian Harris, had just 31% of the snaps. But by expected points, this was a Damian Harris game. He had 9.5 expected points to just 5.5 for White and 4 for Burkhead. So exactly the same expected point workload as White and Burkhead had combined. This is going to be driven in this case just by the fact I think that Harris had the 2 green zone opportunities in the backfield. But I think that's probably something we can expect to happen going forward as well. He's kind of in the Sony Michel role. Although, because Cam Newton's here, and again, Cam Newton poached a green zone rushing touchdown, maybe not something to chase. All in all, is kind of looking like a mess because Harris led in expected points, but it was actually third in snaps and has to deal with Cam at the goal line. Harris did run well, at least. He scored from 22 yards out and put 6.7 points above expectation on the board. Really nice running line of 16 for 102 and 1. In run heavy scripts, he does. I guess he's the best you can do in the backfield, but going to be tough to trust and extremely fragile if they're not in those run heavy scripts. He will probably be on the bench. At wide receiver, Jacoby Myers could be something here. I just saw that they have now just traded for Isaiah Ford, the Patriots. So, maybe that will impact things. I'm not sure, but probably not all that much. Jacoby Myers is kind of impressing over the last couple weeks here. Ran a route on 100% of dropbacks, 43% target share, 58% air yards, a whopper of 1.06. Weighted targets per route run of 0.75. I mean, this was an elite opportunity week here. If you have the guts to play a Patriots pass catcher, it's Jacoby Myers right now. There's really not much else to say here about anybody. I mean, no tight ends ran over 50% of routes. There's just not a lot going on here other than Jacoby Myers maybe being an interesting dart throw. In New Orleans here, Alvin Kamara played on 78% of the snaps. He had a really nice workload, an elite workload of 23.4 expected points. He added 2.4 points to that with efficiency. He's getting truly elite usage. He had 13 targets in this game, which he turned into 9 for 96. I mean, that's absurd. He's going to see some of that get scaled back. Some of those short targets, I think, will go to Michael Thomas once he returns, but it's possible he picks up some additional work on the ground. He had 12 carries here. Latavius Murray had 8. Latavius Murray had 7.7 expected points, played on 24% of the snaps. Murray is getting used at a pretty high rate when he's on the field. I think he could see some of that rushing work go to Kamara. If Kamara is getting less involved as a receiver, we'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, Kamara is just week after week right now getting elite workloads. He doesn't always pop off for massive efficiency, but we know he can. And so, yeah, just looking like one of the best plays in all fantasy right now. At wide receiver, the top 3 wide receivers this week for the Saints were Traquan Smith, Juwan Johnson, and Deontay Harris. And Johnson and Harris combined for 3 targets. And then Smith ran a route on 95% of dropbacks. So it's Traquan Smith, right? He's gonna pop. Didn't really. A decent target share of 17%, nice air yard share of 43%, but I think this is basically peak Smith. Jared Cook ran a route on 77% of dropbacks, had a 21% target per route run in this game, which is good. 0.51 weighted target per route run, which is good. 32% of the air yards, which is really nice for tight end. Good game. It was a good game for Jared Cook. He hasn't been all that heavily involved this year, and I do think his usage gets scaled back when Michael Thomas returns. But, if Thomas does something again and misses more time, Jared Cook looking like a better bet to fill in, I think, than Traquan Smith, especially once you factor in the tight end eligibility. Moving to the Giants. Wayne Gallman here had 43% of the snaps, 9.4 expected points. He had 3.8 points over expectation, which was nice. Deion Lewis played on 28% of the snaps. He had 5.6 expected points. He had 3.2 points over expected. Also pretty nice. Alfred Morris kind of screwing everything up by playing 28% of the snaps. He had 3.7 expected points. He didn't play badly, 0.6 points over expectation. This backfield is just gross right now. It's a 3-way backfield in an offense we don't really want the running back in the first place. So something to avoid, I think. You can't even get any of these guys over 50% of snaps. At wide receiver, Darius Slayton ran a route on 96% of dropbacks. He had a 22% target share, a 38% air yard share. Sterling Shepard ran a route on 76% of dropbacks, so considerably less, 20% less than Slayton, but He was actually targeted at a higher rate with 24% of the targets and 27% of the air yards. So used more shallowly, getting targeted at a higher rate though. Kind of making the case that he's a co-wide receiver one with Slayton. Slayton has more upside, has been out there more often, but Shepard really getting targeted at a nice high rate. I think he's a kind of a higher floor play with Slayton really having a much higher ceiling. Golden Tate ran a route on 57% of dropbacks in this game, just 7% target share, 8% air yard share. This is now his second straight game with a touchdown, but it looks pretty fluky. I'm sure you guys aren't like falling all over yourself to get Golden Tate or play Golden Tate, but yeah, this is, if you thought this was noise, it is. At tight end, Evan Ingram ran a route on 85% of dropbacks. He had a respectable ADOT, not like a deep threat ADOT by any means, but a respectable of 6.8 compared to like the 4 or 5 ADOT that he was having earlier in the season. Hopefully it comes up even a little bit from here. It's nice to see him kind of inching up, getting used a little bit further downfield, which increases the value of those targets. He had a target per route run of 21%, which is pretty good. A whopper of 0.51, which is good. So, not a bad game for Evan Ingram. I still feel like he's a bit of a weaker starting option, but he runs a lot of routes. If the ADOT's coming up a bit, if those targets are becoming more valuable, then he does start to become someone that you can trust a little bit more. Moving on to the Jets. LaMichael Kerrane here played on 49% of snaps, 6.1 expected points, which is kind of like a backups level workload, but he's the lead guy. He didn't play great, left 0.8 points on the field. Frank Gore played on 39% of snaps. He left 1.8 points on the field on another backup workload of 4.8 expected points. Ty Johnson played as well. He had 2.8 expected points, played on 11% of snaps. I mean, this is just like gross. They have this really gross backfield. They're splitting it three ways. This is like legitimately disgusting. This is always my worst part of the show and of the prep, where I have to do the Giants and the Jets back to back and look at these terrible backfields that I would nothing to do with. But, I guess Kerrane would be the guy that actually give him the work. He got 2 targets in this game. He's kind of the guy that would get the receiving work, but they need Gore to go away. There's no reason to think that Adam Gase will stop playing Frank Gore. At wide receiver, let's start with the guy who should be the wide receiver one here, Denzel Mims. He ran around on 89% of dropbacks, had a 14 yards per target, pretty good. I would think is the future of this wide receiver core, but only targeted 3 times, 11% target share, 28% air yard share. Jeff Smith ran a route on 94% of dropbacks. He had a 29% target share, a 44% air yard share, a whopper of 0.74. I don't want to take anything away from Jeff Smith here. Like, he was out there, basically Mims and him were out there for pretty much the same amount, and he dominated targets. To the extent that anyone was getting design targets, it would have been Mims, you would think. So he earned this, I think. And I don't know what to think. Is Brashad Perriman going to take back this role? Probably, because when Jeff Smith got the targets, he actually didn't do anything with them. He had a 3.2 yards per target. So I do like to see players getting the targets. I really think that's important. It says something about their skill, but the coaches can't be too psyched about the 3.2 yards per target. And I would guess that Perriman does get this role back. Speaking of guys that were filling in, Braxton Berrios ran around on 89% of dropbacks. He had a 39% target share. 39% target share. 20% of the air yards. Man, Darnold, he really loves his slot wide receiver. I expect Jamison Crowder, to pick up where he left off once he returns. At tight end, Chris Herndon ran around on 49% of dropbacks, a 6% target per route run. He has turned into absolutely nothing this season. I assume you've dropped him everywhere and haven't even considered picking him up, which is the correct response to what he's done. In Philadelphia, Boston Scott played on 65% of snaps. He had 10.6 expected points in this game. Didn't play great, had 0.7 points left on the field. Corey Clement, he played on 32% of snaps. He had 4.5 expected points and left 0.7 points on the field as well. Jason Huntley had just 3% of the snaps. This was a disappointing night for the entire offense in generating value against a broken Dallas Cowboys team. You think there would be more value here for the backfield, just like 15 expected points here in total. Not great. Travis Fulgham ran a route here on 97% of dropbacks. he had a 27% target share, 22% air yard share, a whopper of 0.56. This was a strong showing, okay? Again, considering that the offense overall really struggled, and then you have Jalen Reagor back. Very curious to see how this role is going to shake out. And Fulgham really has staked a claim as the wide receiver 1 here. And, this added to that case. Jalen Reagor ran a route on 68% of dropbacks, did not run a full slate of routes in this game, just 68%, but did have a 23% target share. So Wentz was really looking for him, and he had 25% of the air yards. He had a very strong weighted target per route run of 0.71, right? This is a clear-cut case where we want to use this weighted target per route run stat that Ben Gretsch created because it shows us what Reagor might be doing when he gets to that full slate of routes that we know he's going to get to after the bye. Maybe it won't be, they have a week 9 bye. Maybe Reagor doesn't come back at week 10 at a full slate. Maybe he's still recovering a little bit from this thumb injury. But at some point this season, he's going to be out there in a full slate of routes. And this was a very strong showing in terms of what he's doing on a route, per route run basis. Not a perfect showing, but I think strong return overall. Greg Ward ran a route on 91% of dropbacks in this game. He had a 19% target share and 8% air yard share. He continues to be a low upside play. At tight end, Dallas Goedert ran a route on 74% of dropbacks. He had a 4% target share and a 4% air yard share. This was obviously not a strong return. 4% of the targets and air yards, really bad. However, he does get the bye, and hopefully he will come back even healthier from the bye week in week 10. Richard Rodgers, interesting note here, just ran a route on 9% of dropbacks. This was a team that had used 2 tight end sets a lot with Goedert and Ertz, but I think that was clearly a way to use Goedert without having to bench Ertz, not kind of a general feature of the offense. Clearly, Richard Rodgers is not someone they're trying to get on the field all that much, ran just 9% of dropbacks. Moving to the Steelers, James Conner had 58% of snaps in this game, an expected points workload of 13.8. He was somewhat efficient, adding 1.2 points to that. Went 15 for 47 on the ground, did score, and then had 3 targets for 3 receptions and 13 yards through the air. Jalen Samuels, he played on 15% of snaps, had just 2.6 expected points, and left all of them on the field. So not a good showing from Jalen Samuels. Anthony McFarland played on 2% of snaps. Not much in terms of expected points. Also basically left everything he was given out on the field. Benny Snell was active and did play special teams in this game, but did not have a single offensive snap. Pretty clear that Conner has command of this backfield. The value of this backfield is not what we would have expected, though. So that's disappointing. But if this backfield kind of swells in its overall value, it's James Conner is going to take advantage of it. Keep your eye out for spots where the Steelers could have a lot of, kind of a spike week in the value to their backfield because Conner really could eat. There are a bunch of guys behind him, but none of them are all that involved. None of them have been playing well. And the guy who I thought was the biggest threat to Conner, Benny Snell, didn't even play a snap. So Conner's role looking very secure right now. At wide receiver, Deontay Johnson, he fought through a hamstring injury in this game, still ran a route on 88% of dropbacks, but could have affected his targets where he saw just 9% of the targets. He did get 25% of the air yards, though, and his ADOT was 19.7. So it may just be that the hamstring really had nothing to do with his ability to get targets, or it just had a very limited effect, and it could have just been that he had this deep ADOT. A lot of people have been talking about how Ben Roethlisberger is not throwing as deep as he used to. If Johnson was in this kind of deep threat role this week, that might be the reason why he didn't really earn targets at a high rate. Chase Claypool ran a route on 85% of dropbacks. He had 28% of the targets and 41% of the air yards. He had an elite 0.71 whopper this week. He's cooled off a bit, but I think that, he could have another one of these massive spike weeks coming up. Juju Smith-Schuster ran a route on 85% of dropbacks. He's starting to see his routes slip a little bit. He was up just, in the high 90s earlier in the season. Now down at 85% this week. He had a 25% target share, though, which was nice, and a 19% air yard share. He's still being targeted very shallowly with an ADOT of 5.5 this week. not a bad time to shop Juju because yes, he's getting targeted at a higher rate now, but with his routes coming down a bit, that's a little concerning. And we also had Johnson banged up in this game. And if that had anything to do with his role, then that could be bad for Juju too. So I continue to be kind of concerned about Juju Smith-Schuster. Wouldn't be a bad time to shop him around, see if people have kind of stopped panicking on him because his value was extremely low a few weeks ago. At tight end, Eric Ebron ran a route on 82% of dropbacks. He had a target per route run of 18%. Not a bad week, got in the end zone, but I think his ceiling does look pretty limited with the amount of talented wide receivers that he's competing with. Moving to San Francisco, Tevin Coleman played on 9% of the snaps and then was knocked out of the game. Just 1.5 expected points workload as a result. JaMychal Hasty, he played on 41% of the snaps, which was less actually than Jerick McKinnon, who played on 50%, but Hasty had the bigger expected points workload, 12.9 expected points to McKinnon's 10.7, but Hasty was inefficient, leaving 2.8 points on the field. McKinnon, who had the tired legs last week, I guess his legs are fresh now because he had a 3.2 points to his workload. He got in the end zone, as did Hasty. McKinnon was more heavily involved in the passing game with 4 targets, which he turned into 4 for 40. And Hasty just had 1, which he turned into 1 for 12, 1 for 2. So yeah, if Coleman misses time, and I think, if we don't have Mostert and Wilson back, then it looks like a Hasty McKinnon split. I would assume that you'd want the McKinnon part of that because you get the receiving equity, but yeah, it kind of remains to be seen. I'm obviously a little bit skittish about McKinnon since the whole tired legs thing happened. But yeah, I think I'd just kind of suck it up and play McKinnon over Hasty if I had the both of them. At wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk ran a route on 96% of dropbacks, had a 28% target share, 32% of the air yards. His ADOT dropped to 8.5 this week with Deebo Samuel out, which is good, right? Because he'd been this deep threat. Now Deebo Samuel goes out. You want to see, all right, is this guy actually going to operate as a number one in this offense, or is he just kind of stuck in this role? Is he Marcus Valdes-Scantling, where no matter what happens, he's going to get targeted 18 yards downfield and not shallower than that? No, he was targeted 8.8, and he had a strong whopper of 0.64. He did operate as the number one wide receiver this week. Great to see. I think it was a very bullish development for Brandon Ayuk. He is kind of the deep threat when they have Deebo Samuel available, but he sees his role get shifted when they don't. Kendrick Bourne ran a route on 91% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 25%, 25% air yard share as well, and a solid whopper here of 0.55. Nice week from Bourne. I've been kind of skeptical of Bourne, but he actually did have some nice volume this week. Trent Taylor ran a route on 71% of dropbacks. He had a 0.2 whopper, not really in the mix. George Kittle, obviously the big injury news. Really sucks to lose Kittle here. He'll be gone for the rest of the fantasy season, maybe back for week 17, but even that's unclear. So Ross Dwelley is going to be filling in for the time being. Jordan Reed could be reactivated from the IR. That would be a lot more interesting for fantasy purposes, so keep an eye on what happens with Jordan Reed. Moving to Seattle, DJ Dallas played 79% of the snaps, had expected points workload of 26.3. Huge, massive, elite workload. Obviously this is a one-game thing, right? Every single running back was hurt. But it's still pretty exciting, just the amount of value that is available in this backfield and seeing it actually condensed into one player. Even though DJ Dallas maybe isn't the player we want it to be, he left 3.5 points on the field. He did get 2 touchdowns. He almost had another touchdown, and his foot was out of bounds just prior to extending for the pylon. Then DK Metcalf punched that one in. Or he didn't run at him. He caught a short reception for a touchdown. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool to see all the value here in one player. Travis Homer was active, did play, had just 10% of the snaps though, kind of an emergency guy really. So yeah, I would, I think that it depends on everyone's health, but to the extent that we can see, the value of the backfield in fewer players, those players can have huge weeks. And this was interesting too, because typically we've seen Seattle in these big shootouts, but San Francisco really flopped. So this was a situation where they still let Russ throw a lot, even when they were up by a fair amount, but they also were in really positive game script, which is nice for the running back as well. At wide receiver, I mean, this was a DK Metcalf week, as you're well aware. He ran a route on 100% of dropbacks, had 42% of the targets, 56% of the air yards, just a giant elite whopper of 1.02, the 2 touchdowns. I did hear, as I was listening to the game, the announcers were talking about, maybe they should they try doubling DK Metcalf? And then it's like, well, they do have Tyler Lockett though, so you can't really do that. But that's where we're at, right? It's like, if you want to double DK Metcalf, but then Tyler Lockett will absolutely destroy you, and vice versa. So really tough to be a defensive coordinator facing the Seahawks right now that they're finally letting Russ cook. Pete was comparing this situation with Metcalf and Lockett over the last few weeks to what we saw last year with Godwin and Evans in Tampa Bay. And I think we probably will see some more weeks like that situation where you kind of, it's a Godwin week or it's an Evans week, and both of them aren't getting there in the same week. But I do think there's a better chance that we get back to where both guys are getting there. Russell Wilson's just so much better than Jameis Winston that I think, he can, in the right environments, get both guys to have these really big weeks. Maybe both of them don't have absolutely monstrous weeks like we've seen, from Tyler Lockett 2 weeks ago and the DK Metcalf, a little short of that, but still an amazing week. Maybe both of them are kind of having those types of weeks, but I think that it can be a little bit more evenly split just because Russ is just so good, can create with his legs. So it probably doesn't matter as much as like what the coverage is dictating. Tyler Lockett, because Metcalf did soak up the volume in this game, did not have all that great of a game, just 14% target share, 28% air yards, a whopper of 0.4, which isn't terrible or anything, but you're expecting more out of Tyler Lockett. He was out there all the time, ran around on 98% of dropbacks. So, there are much better days ahead, obviously. At tight end, Greg Olsen ran around on 54% of dropbacks, had just 14% target per route run. He continues to add very little to this offense. All right, moving to Tampa Bay. And yeah, this wasn't fun. Ronald Jones appears to have been benched, and I think he maybe got benched twice in this game. The first one, right, for a fumble, which as soon as he fumbles, it's like, they're going to bench him. It. And it's so frustrating because he caught this tip pass. He gets down on his knees to catch the pass, and then he's trying to get back up and make a play. Maybe Arians is just pissed off that he didn't just go down and get touched down. But as he's getting up, the defender got on him faster than he realized, punches the ball out for a fumble. That led to a giant score. So right there, Rojo's probably screwed for at least the half, which he was. I don't think he played another snap in the entire half. So that was pretty bad. Then he came back and played the first series of the half. I thought, okay, he looked pretty good in that series. Things are probably okay. I don't think he played another snap after that. So I don't know what happened. And I actually have not been able to figure out so far what happened, why he was re-benched. He ended up playing just 24% of the snaps, had just 8.4 expected points. He had 0.1 point over expectation, which, obviously played right as expected point workload, but he lost a fumble. So actually, excluding the fumble that he lost, he ran well. He ran well. He caught all of his targets off the top of my head. And either way, he played efficiently even with the lost fumble. You know who didn't play efficiently? Leonard Fournette. Okay, when you look at the efficiency numbers, you had to be like, if you just had the efficiency numbers and you were told one of these running backs were benched, it would be very easy to say which running back would bench. You would go, this guy who left 5.7 points on the field got benched. The guy who had almost 16 points of expected workload, and left 5.7 points on the field. Fournette played 73% of the snaps. Obviously, it was very frustrating for me because every time he was out there, I was wondering why Rojo wasn't out there, or if you'd ever see another snap again. But I will say for Fournette, yes, he played very inefficiently. Yes, it looks extremely gross when you look at the efficiency stats. However, he is so slow that I actually think he's fooling defenders because when he does make any sort of quick twitch movement whatsoever, you do see the guys, the defenders, just aren't ready for it. Their angles are screwed because they don't think this dude can move at all. And then he moves just a touch, and it's enough. So, it's not fair to say he's so bad he's good, because he's not good. He left 5.7 points on the field. But, like, maybe he's so terrible that he's not actually terrible. He's still, like, leaving. He's still generating some points. He's still making a few guys miss. He does seem to really like to run into the nearest defender he can find and put his head down. But, whatever. I'm clearly not extremely upset about this whole development. Moving on to the wide receivers. Mike Evans ran around on 90% of dropbacks. He had a target share of 18%, 26% of the air yards. It's not terrible, but, Chris Godwin was out of this game, and Evans turned in a whopper at just 0.44. He did get in the end zone, but it's concerning to me that this was a Godwin miss, and he still just has a 0.44 whopper. This is now weeks on weeks that he's getting below the expected volume that we would expect from an elite wide receiver like Mike Evans. I do not get why they're not kind of scheming him more involved. Let's go to Jaden Mickens, because this is kind of going to exactly what I'm talking about, right? Mickens ran around on 69% of dropbacks. He had a 20% target share, an 18% air yard share, and his whopper was 0.43, just barely behind Evans' whopper of 0.44. I did listen to, this is how sick I am with the Rojo stuff, I listened to a Bruce Arians press conference. He talked about how Mickens played the F. This is Godwin's role. Godwin plays the F for them. So what they did is they did a 1-for-1 replacement where Jaden Mickens came in and played Chris Godwin's exact role, ran all the exact routes that Chris Godwin would have run. And so he got a lot of targets because those are valuable, that's a valuable role that Chris Godwin's in. Why not put Mike Evans in that role in weeks that Chris Godwin's missing? I don't know. I guess they like Evans' ability to stretch the field, but God, it's Jaden Mickens, right? We didn't even think he was going to play. We thought this would be Tyler Johnson. We thought this might be Justin Watson. It's kind of crazy to me that they just kind of have everyone plugged into these very, very specific roles. Not to bring it back to the Jones thing, but that is the clearest cut, unless he's actually benched. That is actually the clearest cut role, I think, in all of the NFL, where Jones is playing on first and second down. As soon as there's ever a third down, he comes off the field. He splits out wide on first and second down. They throw to him all the time on first and second down. He pass blocks on first and second down. But as soon as it's third down, he comes out. As soon as it goes into the 2-minute drill, he's out. So this, I think, is the same type of thinking that's now applying to the Mike Evans stuff, where it's like Mike Evans doesn't play the F. Chris Godwin plays the F. So now Chris Godwin's out. We need someone new to play the F. We'll use Jaden Mickens. And it's frustrating. It's not creative to me. It's like, get your best players the ball. It's definitely... I'm finding it very frustrating to see Mike Evans get kind of schemed out of his own offense. Scotty Miller here, he ran a route on 83% of dropbacks, 15% target share, and a 27% air yard share. He had a whopper of 0.41, so just behind Evans and Mickens. They're really spreading the ball out here. It's not the worst thing to spread the ball out, for real life football. So maybe it's just one of those things where it's Brady and we're getting frustrated because of a target tree that's not condensed. They are winning games. They did almost lose this game, and I was kind of rooting for them too, but they won. So they're probably going to keep doing what they do. I like Scotty Miller as a player, so it's been kind of fun to see him involved. But Mike Evans is an awesome wide receiver, and I'm just frustrated that he's not getting more opportunities here. At tight end, Rob Gronkowski ran around on 64% of dropbacks. He had a 10% target share, 7% air yard share, and a 15% target per out run. None of those are good. So he's cooled off a bit here in this mini resurgence. But the good news is still playing well ahead of Cameron Brate, who ran around on just 14% of dropbacks. Doesn't look like a bad option going forward. Moving to Tennessee, I'm going to say this about Derrick Henry, and he's probably going to body bag me, but I'm starting to get a little bit concerned about his stealing, given the snaps and touches he's ceding. Now, he just came off this massive performance a few weeks ago against Houston, and I was actually on him that week. That was the week that I won the Engage 8. So, it's kind of crazy to now start questioning his ceiling. But Jeremy McNichols played 35% of the snaps to Henry's 53%. Deontay Foreman was also involved in this game, playing 10% of snaps. Henry still got his. He still got 18 carries for 112 yards. He still got one target, got in the end zone. So, it's fine. Like, they're going to keep using Henry. It's kind of bullish for Henry in some respects this game because this wasn't a perfect script for him and they still used him quite a bit. But at the same time, I don't love to see Jeremy McNichols out there as much as he was. 35% of the snaps. He got 3.6 expected points to Henry's 12.8. So Henry really needed those 3.6 expected points this week, given that he only got the 12.8, to show that kind of elite ceiling like he's priced at. Like if you're playing him in DFS, you need him to have an elite ceiling. At this point, if you've acquired him, or if you're not trading him, if you're holding the value of him in Dynasty, you're really expecting him to be delivering elite performances every week. And it's just a little concerning to me that you've got Jeremy McNichols at 35% of snaps this week and Deontay Foreman at 10%. Foreman stole another 2.4 expected points. And so I think that it'll be a little interesting to see if this is just something weird with this game or if it's something that continues to go forward. Henry's team is very committed to him, but again, he's an expensive player in all formats. So losing these 10 opportunities that he lost to Foreman and McNichols, 5 to McNichols, 4 carries in the target, and then 5 carries to Foreman is going to hurt. And both these guys actually played well. McNichols went 4 for 49 as a rusher, and Foreman went 5 for 37. So pretty solid days. I also will say it's just kind of fun to see Deontay Foreman back, right? Because he tore his Achilles tendon back in 2018, kind of bounced around since then, and he profiles as like a slightly lighter version of Derrick Henry, one of these big, oversized rushers. And so maybe he has found a home here long term. I hope he has. It was nice to see that he's healthy. But yeah, for Henry's purposes, keep an eye on these snap shares. Hopefully his snap share comes back up. At wide receiver, A.J. Brown ran a route. A.J. Brown ran a route on 97% of dropbacks. He had a 24% target share, 9% air yard share, a whopper of 0.43. Corey Davis ran a route on 85% of dropbacks. He had a 34% target share, a 42% air yard share, and a whopper of 0.81, which is elite. Davis now has the higher whopper on the season. I think some of that's related to Brown not being fully healthy at times. But Davis is having a nice season this year. We can't take that away from him. This probably is going to be his final year with the Titans. They did not pick up his 5th-year option. But, he is going to be landing somewhere in free agency. And good for him that he's finally kind of putting it together a little bit. And is actually technically the wide receiver 1 this year, although going forward, do expect it to be A.J. Brown most weeks. At tight end, Jonnu Smith ran around on 64% of dropbacks. He had a 10% target per route run, which is bad. He's been very strong, though, in that stat all year. I'm not that concerned about his ability to get targets. However, Anthony Ferkser ran around on 55% of dropbacks, and he stole 3 targets. So I'm concerned much less about Smith falling off this 1 week in target per route run and much more about Ferkser running around on 55% of dropbacks, getting targeted himself. This could be a thorn in Jonnu Smith's side going forward. I'm still willing to start Jonnu Smith in season long in Dynasty, but keep an eye on his routes run per dropback in week 9. All right, that'll do it for stat chasing. Like we said earlier, if you want to be in this listener league, we told you what to do. The hashtag SC banners. Say your favorite stat from the week. We'll get you in. You'll be on either me or Pete's team. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It'll be really helpful if you can do that. And I'll plug Ben's Stealing Signals again because this weighted targets per hour has been a really fun addition to the show. Thanks to Ben for creating that. Thanks for Ben for sharing that. And yeah, go check that out. Like I said, he has a really good rundown on like everything that we know to date from weighted target per route run. So highly recommend Stealing Signals. All right, guys, we will see you on Wednesday at 9:15 Eastern for the regularly scheduled edition of Ship Chasing.